Ever wonder what it's like to be all done with homeschooling and looking back on all the highlights and struggles while savoring the beautiful results? Today's guest is the joyful Bonnie Landry, here to share the fruits of a homeschool life.
Welcome to Homeschooling Saints, the podcast that helps you create the homeschool you love for the people you love. Our host is Lisa Mladinich, a Catholic life coach, TV host, best-selling author, and an instructor at Homeschool Connections.
Before we get started, remember to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, click the bell to join our channel. Hello and welcome. I'm Lisa Mladinich, your host, and Bonnie Landry is our guest today, sharing the fruits of a homeschool life. Bonnie Landry is a Catholic convert, wife, and mama who lives in the little hamlet of Cobble Hill on Vancouver Island, British Columbia, with her family. She and her husband, Albert, have been raising and homeschooling their 7 children since 1987. They've reached the age of their children marrying and grandbabies coming in quick succession. Bonnie hosts the podcast Make Joy Normal, Cozy Homeschooling, where she covers a range of topics that lend themselves to her mission, joy. Living simply, discipline with dignity, fostering community, seeking to be present, and encouraging families are all central to her life. Years of homeschooling confirms for Bonnie that strong relationships are fundamental for success in education and the rest of life. Life is kind of a bust if you can't get along with people. She strives to make joy normal. And you can listen to Bonnie's podcast at Make Joy Normal at buzzsprout.com. You can also find her at bonnielandry.ca. That's her website. Bonnie, it is great to see you again. It's been too long.
Thank you. It's been way too long. So nice to be here.
I know. We did a whole bunch of really great episodes with you when we first launched this podcast. And, life just happens. And there was really no rhyme or reason to not seeing you all this time. But I'm delighted to have you back on the show.
Oh, yeah. No, this is fantastic. Thank you so much for asking me.
Yeah. So you homeschooled a good many years. What was the total from soup to nuts?
32. 32 years.
32 years of homeschooling. So those of you who just started, don't panic. She did it one day at a time. But say, when you first started, what were you and your husband envisioning and kind of hoping for your children? Why was it worth all the sacrifice?
Well, I think my husband was hoping I would change my mind, to be honest. He didn't really dial in after the first year, for sure. He did. So I would say he was okay with me doing it, but he wasn't, all hurrah about it. But for me, what I envisioned was that education could be something beautiful and fun and interesting, and there wouldn't be a lot of busy work. There wouldn't be a lot of wasted time in what we chose to do, and that it could be cozy. That was my primary goal. And I think many people enter into homeschooling hoping it's going to be cozy, right? And that was the vision I came in with. That was a vision I stuck to, and that sort of made our homeschooling. I think that would be the if you were looking at it from the top down now, bird's eye view, that it was primarily cozy and friendly and warm.
Oh, I love that. So I love that you just did what was my next impulse, which was to define what you meant by cozy, which was friendly and warm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so a friendly and warm homeschool. That doesn't sound like a high-pressure environment where you're, flagellating yourself every day because you're not sure your kids are keeping up with the rest of the world.
Yeah, that was really important to me, that I didn't get caught in that trap of, and I guess I sort of assumed that all homeschoolers were thinking the same thing that I was. And as we got into it by a few years, I realized that a lot of people would spiral downward. They started off desiring that cozy, warm environment where you're reading a lot to your kids and, life is kind of a slower pace and all of that. And in reality, the ticking of the boxes comes in pretty quick, right? Mm-hmm. And, by sometimes comparing yourself to others, but also just the pressure that we put on ourselves. And I think that's something that we really have to be very intentional about avoiding as homeschooling moms, right?
Yeah, and that's why, as you said in your bio, how relationships are so important. We simply cannot keep perspective without those positive relationships in our lives. Oh my gosh, I would never have endured without my homeschool friends. So say a little bit about which of your expectations were fulfilled. What did you hope for that you lived?
Right. Okay, so I would say that I wanted primarily for my children to love to learn. And that was definitely something that we realized. I wanted home to be the place when they were adults where they wanted to come back to, that this was a place of where it was solid and it was good and they felt comfortable. And it certainly, I think it's important to qualify to people that it certainly didn't mean I was nice all the time. So an expectation not fulfilled, I sort of imagined that I would be nice all the time, and I wasn't. But I knew when I was getting derailed too, and in the derailment, you want to go back to your ideals, right? So fulfilling your ideals is something that is really important. You're never going to do that perfectly. For me, I think I imagined that I would do that more perfectly than I did, right? And of course, we're human and we're frail, and we don't know how tired we're going to be, or what life's going to throw at us. So in the conversation of expectations realized, I think it's important to kind of give a nod to that. Is there's many expectations not realized, but that primary desire for a home that eventually my kids would want to come back to, and for them to love learning, those things were realized. And in the big picture of things, I think that's what matters most to me, right?
Yeah. And what about positive surprises? You created this vision. We'll just use the common lingo of our day, right? A North Star, a vision, something you were shooting for, a feeling, a sense of welcome and rightness about your family home to be a place they would love, but also that igniting that passion for learning. What surprised you?
Yeah, big surprise. So my husband and I are both, reasonably academic. I never had any post-secondary education, but I've always been a, reader, and I was always good as a student. My husband got his business degree. He was always a good student and whatnot. So academia came fairly easily to us, I would say. I approached school without the thought of academia. Like, we just didn't pursuing sort of greatness academically was never part of the program. What we pursued was mastery of the subject before we moved on to something else, right? Mastery was really important, but to have it done in a joyful framework so that it wasn't horrible for the child, right? So that learning was something, we're going to just take this one day at a time. Because sometimes things were hard for them, like, a couple of kids struggled with math, or a couple of kids struggled with language. Okay, that's hard for you. So we're just going to break it down, and we're just going to keep breaking it down until it's doable for you. And we're just going at your pace, and we're not comparing you to anybody else. That's just the way it was, right? I wasn't on anybody else's timeline but our own. So I would say I think people could and did look at us and think, well, how are they going to go to college, or how are they going to learn when it's such a soft approach, right? And all of our kids turned out to be incredibly academic. They've all gone off to college and university, which we were surprised. We were kind of more putting them in the direction of the trades. And, not everybody has to go to college or university, and, various other things. But they all did, and they've all performed incredibly well academically. And I think love of learning and not being pushed, especially when you're young, not being sort of pushed along before you're ready for something, really laid that foundation for what we would call academia, right? That was certainly never a goal. And yet it ended up being a very pleasant surprise. At the end of the day, it's like, oh, okay. Because it was all a big experiment, really.
Uh-huh.
You know what I'm saying?
Sure. You don't know what kids God is going to give you, or what, as you said, life is going to throw at you. Yeah. And there's all the cultural pressure with comparisons and all the things. I love that you said that you took that comparison piece out. And I think maybe that sense, this is just me theorizing, and, as an individual, my sense would be that you gave them a sense of the worthiness of the process, but also their own individual path being worth slowing down for, taking a look at, supporting. And so it just sounds like it was very affirming, not having to push because of an artificial standard.
Exactly. And, my kids really, they were in high school before they kind of realized that other kids are doing, the big grade 11 science textbook or whatever. And eventually they chose to do that. I never pushed that on them. I let them choose sort of when was the right time, when they were ready for that. But they were sort of in a sense sheltered from the fact that there was even a curriculum out there, or the school did something different than they did. It was just not part of the conversation. And I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. That's really neat. What ended up being tougher, or maybe part of the vision that didn't work, or, what were the struggles?
Yeah. Really the struggle was me, right? I love G.K. Chesterton's response, what's wrong with the world? And he wrote in as an editorial to this question that was put in a paper. And he said, "Dear sir, I am." Because it's so true, right? What was the thing that was the most difficult, the struggle, the thing that didn't realize? Like I said before, I thought I would be nicer on a more consistent basis, right? And that takes time. And every year that goes by, you learn, if it's your goal, if it's your intention to learn how to be closer to Christ, to learn how to operate without getting angry, and all of those things take a lot of years, right? And a lot of rubbing off of the rough spots. And so I think when I entered into it, I thought, I'm so got this, right? Because I'm really nice. But you don't realize how challenged you're going to be in that. And so I would say that was the biggest difficulty, was my own my own weakness. What does St. Paul say? That we're we do the thing that we don't want to do, and we don't do the thing that we want to do. And so you struggle with that on literally daily basis. Right.
He also says, I think it's Romans 8:28, that God brings all things to the good for those who love him. Mm-hmm. And I love that you mentioned St. Paul, because he talks all the time about his weaknesses and his struggles, mm-hmm. and everything's just so hard.
I know. Yeah, I really resonate with Paul.
I love him.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, good. We're going to take a short sponsor break, everybody. We're with Bonnie Landry, talking about the fruits of a homeschool life. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Walter Crawford.
And I'm Maureen Whitman.
We are the co-founders of homeschoolconnections.com and proud sponsors of the Homeschooling Saints podcast,
which is here to help you homeschool more joyfully, more easily, and more effectively.
We want to thank you for listening.
And we invite you to check out our courses at homeschoolconnections.com.
And now, back to our program.
All right, we are back with Bonnie Landry, talking about the fruits of a homeschool life. Bonnie, you mentioned that you had your own learning curve as well. You weren't just teaching the kids, right? There was a lot going on in you. Would you mind stepping us into that experience?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's a couple of things that I think would illustrate that fairly well. One of them was this opportunity. So we live on the West Coast. We live on Vancouver Island, and one night there was an earthquake. We get a lot of little earthquakes, right?
Wow.
This is years and years ago. So we get a lot of little earthquakes, and we always have training. Like on the West Coast, you have this training of what to do in an earthquake and how to earthquake proof your home and what to have on hand for emergencies and things like that. And people talk all the time about, oh, did you feel the little earthquake last night? Did you feel, I heard the cups rattle or whatever. And I never felt anything. Okay. I never, I'm not very aware. And so, one night I had just climbed into bed, and I was laying in my bed, and I all of a sudden heard this crack, and it felt like a giant truck hit our house, right? Just this boom. And we live up on high on a mountain, right? So we're kind of on a rock. So I can only imagine what that was like for people down below. But so it was a fairly significant earthquake. So I knew that this is what they prepare you for, right? When you've been doing your earthquake drills and things like that we get our entire lives. that, okay, this is what the beginning of an earthquake feels like. So the next 30 to 60 seconds are crucial, right? This is when the training that you get really, really comes into play. Okay, what do I do, right? What do I do now? So you want to make sure you get under something. You want to make sure that you're away from any glass, windows, things like that. There's things that you want to have in place. And so I'm sitting there thinking, okay, what is the next 30 to 60 seconds? What I want to do is go run around and remind all my kids about what they need to do, right? And I thought, but I can't. I have to trust that they're going to know what to do because of what we've talked about. And it would be dangerous for me to get up and try to teach them now. And they're not going to understand me because we're in the middle of a crisis. So this next 30 to 60 minutes, 30 to 60 seconds, all I really can do is pray, right? That I've prepared them well enough, because I realized at that moment that in the middle of an earthquake is not the time to teach people what to do in the middle of an earthquake. Okay. So as it turned out, nothing happened. It was just that one crack and it was over, right? But for the next hour or so, I was sensitive to just thinking about what could happen if it started again or whatever, and thinking through my thoughts. But what I couldn't help thinking was that when children, like I talk a lot about relationships, when children have their earthquakes, their meltdowns, their big emotions, the time to teach them about what to do about big emotions is not in the middle of them having them. And it just struck me as such an unbelievable parallel at that moment in time, is like, okay, I can't teach you anything because your brain is laying on the floor beside you. There's nothing I can do right now. It doesn't matter how loud I get. It doesn't matter how much I'm going to threaten you. It doesn't matter if I pick you up and haul you into the corner. Nothing I say is going to land right now because you're having your own personal little crisis. And so that became an analogy that I've used a lot in speaking, and a lot for myself, that I can't make any difference until their brain is ready to receive. And so often as parents, we spend a lot of time kind of either yelling or lecturing or threatening when our child is in the middle of an emotional earthquake, trying to get their behavior to change. And it's actually not possible. They have to be at some point receptive to what you're saying and being able to understand what you're saying. So that image of my child laying on the floor and their brain laying beside them was very helpful to me. This is not the time. This earthquake is not the time so we have to let it run. We have to let it run its course. We have to step back. We have to pray, use that 30 to 60 seconds or minutes or however long that takes to spin out. It doesn't mean you ignore them. Some kids would like you to come and rub their back, or some kids would like you to just walk out of the room when they're in their big meltdown. You have to be sensitive to that child and what they need, but you are not going to be able to teach them anything, not math, not how to write a paragraph, not how to behave at this moment when you're in a massive crisis, right? So regardless of how the crisis happened, if they're on the floor in a puddle because they don't understand the math you're trying to teach them, or if they're in a middle of a crisis because you said, no, they can't have, a snack right now. The multitude of reasons that our kids, big and small, that they have emotional crashes. We just have to know that that's a reality that we're dealing with, right?
Yeah, no, I love that. You've really got my wheels turning. I'm thinking of so many situations. I hope our listeners are too, because I'm remembering things and wondering about other things that are possibilities. Like I have thought a lot about when is the right time to broach a subject, but you make such a great point. When somebody's in their amygdala, right? They're freaking out about something. They're just not teachable. And it's not fair to expect them to learn anything at that time.
And it's a great question. When is the right time? And I remember there's a psychologist, Gordon Neufeld, who wrote the book, Hold On to Your Kids. Many of the listeners, I'm sure, will be familiar. Beautiful work he does on sort of attachment parenting. I asked him that question. So when is the right time? And he said, you know what? You just reach in and you touch. and you see what the reaction is. And if the reaction sets them off again, you know it's not the right time. So you just reach in and touch and reach in and touch. And sometimes that's all you need to do is reach in and touch, right? You don't need to have a big, long conversation about it. But you know, that you had a lot of big feelings about when I said no to you, you know, or your math was really, really hard for you. Reach in and touch. And then maybe the next day or 2 hours later say, you know, I'm okay with taking math down to a different level and approaching it differently. We can talk about that. When you're ready, we'll talk about that, you know, and just reach in and touch and reach in and touch. And if that leads to a bigger conversation, depending on the age of the child, but for most small children, that reaching in and touching is all you need, right? I thought that was a beautiful, that helped me a lot.
I love that. That almost made me cry. Yeah. Because I feel like reaching in and touching is me saying, you matter, you're good. Like if someone is willing to like do that, you know, just place their hand on you, it's, you know, it's healing too. I mean, we know there's a lot about just the needs, our human needs to be held, touched, affirmed, even physically. That's beautiful.
Even, you know, if we have a blowout with our spouse, right? If that happens and an hour goes by and you're both, you know, frustrated and one is able to reach out and just, you know, put their hand and say, you know, are you ready to talk? It's okay if you're not, right? But just that acknowledgement that, okay, a thing has happened and we need to come to a place of peace about this. But to have one or the other reach out and respond, and if you know, if I throw up my hands and say no way, right? My husband knows, okay, I'm going to try that again an hour or two from now, right? We need to come to a place of peace about this. It's huge, right?
Yeah. Thank you for that. Really appreciate it. Any other learning curves or epiphanies that you wanted to share?
Yeah. So this is an interesting one because it happened more later on in my homeschooling career. But it's interesting because I felt very strongly that you don't push kids, you don't you challenge them, but you don't push, right? That was my watchword. And one of my sons really struggled with math, and we just took our time, going slow. It was going fine. He didn't like it, but he was moving along just fine. And then we sort of hit the point of algebra, right? Mm-hmm. And I said to him, listen, like most of my kids, by the time they hit algebra, they were working independently, right? So they could take the textbook, they could teach themselves with very little input from me because their foundation was really strong. And he hit that point and he didn't know, I don't know how to do algebra because my brain couldn't absorb that information when I was taking algebra in high school. And my teacher passed me and said, I hope you never do math again. He knew I was a good student. He knew I was trying, but I couldn't do it. Right? Mm-hmm. My foundation wasn't strong enough. So anyway, we were approaching the algebra, and this is like math is already hard and already frustrating. And then you think you're talking in terms of X and Y, like don't talk to me about this stuff. So I was walking through it with him, and I said, if I reach a point where I can't help you anymore, we'll get a tutor or we'll ask a friend who's good at algebra to come in and help us a couple of times a week, and we'll just take it as slow as we need to take it. And so every day we would open the book and we would try and just get a little bit done, a little bit of understanding. And basically, as soon as he opened the book, he would just glaze over, right? And so I tried really hard to think the best of my kids. That if they were struggling with something, that either it was really, really hard for them, or there was something else going on that made them unable to concentrate, right? Because that happens too, right? They're dealing with some other thing or a clash with a friend or a sibling or whatever. You don't know always what's going on, or even just hormonal changes going on for them. But I've always tried to think the best of them, right? And in this particular moment, I thought, you know what? I think he's playing me, right? I think he's playing me and I don't want to be played. So I stopped thinking the best of him and started thinking ill of him, right? So for 2 or 3 days in a row, I said, Noah, okay, we just got to sit down and get it done. Okay, it's time. Okay, I'm breaking this down really, really simply for you. And if we just get one paragraph done and a couple of practices for that particular skill set that we're looking at here, we're breaking it way down. But you can't just glaze over every time we open the book. Okay, so this happened 2 or 3 days in a row. And the more that I had this attitude of I'm thinking kind of ill of him, like he's playing me, the more angry I got. Right? So it was so rare that I got mad at my kids about their schoolwork. I got mad about other things, but it was so rare because I guarded that so carefully And so, maybe morning 4 or whatever, that I have this new attitude that I'm carrying with me, opens up his book, glazes over, like, oh, I can't do this or whatever. And I just snapped and I started yelling at me. I can't believe you're doing this. I can't believe you're just glazing over. You're not even drawing. You're just playing me. I said it out loud. And so, of course, he ran away crying, he's whatever, 13 or something. I stormed away. I was angry. And within a few minutes, I thought, oh my gosh, I have messed up so badly. This is so counterintuitive for me. This is so counter to what I believe. And so I let an hour or so go by, and I went into him and I said, listen, no, I'm so sorry, right? I'm so sorry that I had that attitude. I don't know what came over me. I just, decided that you were taking advantage of me, and I decided that you were doing this on purpose. And, I'm so sorry that I did that. And he said, that's okay, Mom. It's okay, Mom. I forgive you. It was so sweet about it. But then he said something that just resonated so much. He said, Mom, when you yell at me, I can't learn at all. Right? And I thought, who of us can? Like, imagine if you're working at your job and you're learning a new skill and your boss is standing over you and they're guiding you and they're walking with you and they're helping you along in something that's really a brain stretch, and you think, okay, I got to sit with this. Thanks for your help. And I'll call you again if I need help. Is that okay? Oh yeah. We have support. Or if the boss is standing and saying, you know what, you're smart cookie. Why are you not getting this? I cannot believe you're not getting this, right? Or it starts yelling at you. Imagine the pressure. Imagine the difference in those two learning scenarios, right? Yeah. So for me, that was a real learning curve for me, but also an ability to be able to empathize. Like, when our attitude changes, that we think our kids are playing us, or we think we're doing it on purpose, we stop thinking the best of them, we're in trouble, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear that. There are days when I feel my attitude has really slipped sideways, and I start to like, have I had enough sleep? Am I coming down with something? Because I'm kind of a cheerful person, but I can suddenly, out of the blue, just be boiling over with resentment.
Yeah. Yeah, we just so much have to step back and reflect on why we're feeling. It's not the other, it's us, right?
Yeah.
What's the problem with the world?
Yeah. Love G.K. Chesterton. It's me.
Yes.
Oh, I love it. I would love to know, as we're sort of getting toward the end of our conversation, I'm sure everyone's dying to know, and you speak to homeschoolers a lot, so you answer this question a lot. What are your kids up to now? How'd they turn out? Give us the post-game wrap up.
Yeah. Oh, I know. It's so good. I'm just so grateful. I'm so grateful. I would say most of my kids, if not all of them, went through bumpy times, right? Often late teens, 18, 19, 20, around that time. Not for everybody, but they all went through 2 or 3 years, kind of bumpy, where kind of our relationship felt at odds. They're finding their own way. They're becoming adults. And that's very, very hard. So it was not always smooth. Okay. And that's really important for parents to know and to anticipate that it might not always be smooth. And we have to give them a lot of time, a lot of love. We don't have to put up with it, right? We don't have to, we can say, it's not okay for you to speak to me like that, right? Or this is our house and you live here, and, there are rules that we have in place. If you don't like that, well, we'll have to talk about how we're going to manage that. But, you don't have to put up with it, but you do have to always keep the door open. Right. And that's so important to when your kids are going through those bumpy times, to kind of keep your end of the relationship open. Don't shut them down, right? Don't shut them off. Don't close doors, because you will live to regret that. So having come through those bumpy times, it's just, I feel like most of my family, so just so people know, I have 3 daughters. They're 37, 33, 30. Then I have 3 sons who are 27, 24, and 21. And then my youngest daughter, Lydia, is 18. So there's a big span in our family, right? So my older girls all went off to college and university to some degree, sometimes 1 year, sometimes 3 or 4. They are all married now. My oldest has 2. My second one has 4. She just started her 4th this year. And my youngest just had her 5th about a month ago. Not even a month ago, 2 weeks ago. And so they are all homeschooling their kids. So, and I'm so grateful. I just can't even believe that, because it was not something I ever pushed to, that they should homeschool, or, if you're not homeschooling, that's a bad thing or whatever. I just want to support them. You got to love them and support them. And other than that, kind of keep your mouth shut. And so they're all doing well. They're all married. They all so we have 11 grandchildren, and they're all being homeschooled. And then our 3 sons, the oldest is married. They just got married last year. They don't have children yet. And then the middle son is in university, and the youngest son just graduated university. He's engaged to be married. Getting married next summer. And then our youngest is away for her first year at college. So yeah, it's just, we love having them here. Our daughter and her son, our daughter and son-in-law and their family, until they bought their own home, lived on a little cottage on our property. And now our son, who's engaged, wants to live there once he's married with his new wife. And another son would like to come over and live on the island. So we have one that lives across the country, which is hard. That's hard, but she's got a beautiful support system there, and we get to, visit with them 2 or 3 times a year, which is great. But the rest all live pretty close by, and, have lots of time they spend with us, and lots of time we spend with the kids. So yeah, it's good. It's good.
Oh my goodness.
We're so grateful.
Yeah, well, one of the first conversations I ever had with you was just a beautiful, rich, super fun conversation about how your family was doing Christmas. And that was probably 5 years ago. And so now I'm imagining 5 years later, how all the grandchildren and people gathering, and just how things have changed. Like, you're in this next season, and there's all this other homeschooling going on. There's so much success there. And I hear that you didn't get there easily, that it was joys and sorrows, right? We always say. But if you could go back, was there anything that you would do differently?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say definitely, as my kids got into the later high school years, we were really, really grateful for coming across. I met Walter at a homeschool conference that I was speaking at in Houston.
Oh, Walter Crawford, Homeschool Connections.
Yeah, and Homeschool Connections. And we were so grateful for that, because I think I still had 2 or 3 at home at that point. And we had done a little bit of online high school courses, but it was so good for my kids, and Homeschool Connections had so much to offer. First of all, writing an essay for somebody who's not me, or doing a project for somebody who's not me. And I would have exposed my high schoolers to more online courses. And if I had known about Homeschool Connections earlier, I would have made sure that my older kids got to do that, because I think that was a really important part of our high school, I felt. And then they could discuss or not discuss with me. They could be very on their own and independent with it, or they could tell me about their classes, and depending on their personality or the class, we would talk a lot about what they were up to or not. And I think it was really good preparation for them going off to college. Mm-hmm. Right? To be able to have that experience, and to be able to know what it's like to learn from someone else, who's an actual human, as opposed to me or a textbook, right?
Yeah. And I don't mean to sound like I'm doing a commercial, but one of the things I've always admired about the company, about Homeschool Connections, is that they find people with a passion for a subject. Yeah. And they're not all Catholic. Some of them are Christian, Protestant Christians, but large percentage are Catholic. And they're all people who really have a lot of respect for our faith, and who are prayerful people. And then they bring expertise and real joy to the teaching. That blows my mind. Like, if you could line up a bunch of people to teach your kids subjects that you're not so hot at. So yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. I used Homeschool Connections for my daughter in high school as well. And she had some great courses.
And I love something that just about the classes themselves is that Maureen said to me one time, we were just chatting about Homeschool Connections, and she said, yeah, when we ask somebody if they want to teach a class, I just say, well, you figured out, you know what you love, and you figured out. And I thought, okay, I feel like that's how I approached homeschooling. So instead of me giving a curriculum to, Joseph Pierce, for heaven's sakes, let him figure out his own, because he's brilliant, right? And everybody has their brilliance that they have, right? And so that was then more of my time and energy could be spent on doing the things that I'm good at. And they could also take things that they're interested, or maybe things that I'm lacking in, that they could take with someone else. So yeah, definitely something I would have done differently.
Yeah, nice way to change things up. And as you said, it can be a bridge to the outside world. So where would you like to leave us today as we're reflecting back on the fruits of a homeschool life?
I think that what I love in general to leave parents with is just a reminder and an encouragement to please put the relationship first. Nothing transcends the relationship, right? Your relationship with God, your relationship with your child, right? So nothing is more important, but we have to remind ourselves of that this algebra is not more important than my love for you. This algebra is not more important than my relationship with you. Often what we do out of love, homeschooling, we do it out of love, doesn't look loving, right? And so we need to be very sensitive to what we're doing and why we're doing it, and be big pictured and farsighted, right? Remind yourself every single morning when you get up, if it's part of your prayer or part of your exam, and remind yourself why you're doing what you're doing, right? To put things in perspective.
I love that. Bonnie Landry can be found, everybody, at Make Joy Normal at buzzsprout.com. That's the podcast, and it's in our show notes, but also at her website, Bonnie Landry, and just the way it sounds, BonnieLandry.ca. And what a joy to have you with us again, Bonnie. We got to do lots more.
Oh, sure. I'd love to. This is fantastic.
Oh, all right. Thanks, everyone, for being with us today. We really appreciate you. We're praying for you. Please pray for us, too, and have a beautiful rest of your day. God bless you. And that's our show for today. Our program is sponsored by homeschoolconnections.com. Be sure to subscribe to Homeschooling Saints and leave us an honest review. God bless you, and thank you for joining us.